Yes. Do you think when you have created the podcast Homecoming that you will become one of the such a great series?
Uh, Definitely not. When we were doing the podcast, we were really just trying to figure out how to do a podcast, and that felt challenging enough. And so it was really important to us then to be really focusing on the audio form as the final result. And I think hopefully that's what let us do a good job with that. And then so everything since then has been a very strange surprise.
Thank you very much.
Amarine?
Yes, sorry. Did the Homecoming season 2 made you want to do more podcast?
Oh, that's an interesting question. I think we always were interested in the way that the material that we took from the podcast and how we needed to change it in order to get it right for television. And yes, sometimes when we were going through the process of production, needing to secure sets or dealing with the huge, enormous things that happen when you're doing a big television production, we would joke about how much easier it is to just get some actors and have them stand around a microphone. But I think we probably was more in a humorous way. But then, yeah, I mean, in the future, moving forward, it's such a great way to get a story out quickly. And it's such a great way to get to the heart of what you're trying to say, I think, when you do a narrative podcast. So it's something in the future I think I'd be interested in doing.
Okay.
All right, Lorenzo.
Congratulations. What lesson did you learn on season 1 that you applied on season 2 when it came to working on season 2?
I'm curious to hear what Micah has to say. For now, I'll just say a little different than the lessons. It was that season 1, we wrote as the podcast and tried to move over into this form and take advantage of the form. But in a lot of ways, it was still shaped by its original audio roots. And so with season 2, we had a totally open canvas, and it was exciting to really imagine the full possibility in the story. So there's a lot more running around. There's a lot more outdoors. Season 1 was so contained and confined to these 2 people in a room. So it was exciting to sometimes take lessons, but sometimes now be free to forget certain lessons too.
Thanks.
I thought that was a great answer. I don't
Thank
think
you.
we need
Thank
anything
you.
additional there.
Well,
Joe? Joe?
Can you hear me?
Yep.
Okay. Well, I listened a little bit to your podcast about where you're talking about transitioning from the podcast to the screen and how you just said you had the open canvas this time. I'm interested in, I think and I'm interested in what challenges you met just going from just the, writing just straight for screen. What were some of the biggest challenges that you didn't, or some of the things you didn't expect?
You mean between writing a podcast and writing a TV show?
Yeah. Or from going from podcast to TV show last time, and then now, you went just straight there. Yeah.
Right. Yeah. I mean, I think we learned a lot writing season 1. When you do a podcast, you're just dealing with at most 2 or 3 voices in a room at a time, and you're dealing with props and setting. So you use some sound effects to do setting. So it's a very evacuated, very specific form, and everything sort of has to carry a ton of weight if you introduce it into a scene, because things can get confusing. And I think with TV, the thing that we really learned is how to use visuals to sort of speed along the storytelling, because I think, and between season 1 and season 2, I think this becomes apparent, TV is a faster paced medium in general, I would say, than podcasts or radio. So when we got into season 2, I think what we were excited about doing is dropping viewers into a mysterious, strange world that we were establishing less through dialogue than we were through visuals and props and cues like that. And so when season 2 starts, as you guys have maybe seen, we meet a character we've never seen before, who's in a place we've never been. And we were excited to sort of just have a viewer start this experience and be like, wow, I wonder how this connects back to the world I know from season 1. And then we follow Janelle Monáe's character as she leads us back in that direction.
Great, thank you.
Ravi.
Yeah, hi. Am I audible?
Yes.
Yeah, so my question to you guys is that, this show has a variety of genres to it. There is thriller, there is drama, and then there's also this dystopian feeling to it. How did you guys decide on that?
It's really, it's something that I think we're happy with, but it's not something that we really ever discuss, I don't think, right? It's just sort of the weird way that our minds work when they're smushed together. So we like having sort of some kind of propulsive thriller element to carry you through, but then of course, sort of at the core, we want to focus on these relations to the two characters. And that's a way that the podcast legacy, I think, really helps us, is keeping it always very grounded in conversation and character. And then we also just like amusing ourselves. So we try and sort of pepper with ridiculous things. So I think it's just what happens when you don't maybe try and label it from the start and you free yourself to do whatever. And then hopefully these weird combinations happen.
Okay, thank you.
All right, guys, now we're going to open it up if anyone else has other questions.
I have another question. Can I ask?
Yes.
Yeah. So your podcast featured Oscar Isaac, Catherine Keener, and David Schwimmer. Do you believe there is room for them to appear in the series as well?
As other characters?
Yes, or not the same, obviously.
Right. Well, no, I mean, that's interesting. What do you think, Mike?
I would say, yeah, I mean, they were so incredible in the podcast, each of them, and each of their takes on the characters was so different and fascinating and cool in its own way. So obviously we wouldn't want to do like or maybe not obviously, I don't think we'd be interested in doing like a meta thing where they show up as different versions of the same person. But having those actors back in different forms would be incredible. And I think we, like we'd be very lucky to have any of them. It would just be a question of finding the right role.
Well, maybe in season 9, they're making a podcast, the events of season 1 become
like a
so
Seinfeld
famous.
thing.
Yeah, like Seinfeld. They make a podcast about season 1 and
Right.
bring them in.
Yeah.
So
nice.
Ravi, in 8 short years, all that could be yours if you
Yeah.
just a little patience. Yeah.
Thank you.
Can I ask a question?
Yes,
Definitely.
So Amazon ordered both seasons right at the beginning. How different is second season from the initial vision? How has it evolved?
We were pretty loose on the second season even then. It was really important to us to focus on things one season at a time with sort of a sense that there's something to come and enough avenues, but we didn't want to be in a situation of holding a lot of things back or dropping a lot of frustrating clues that we tell you will be resolved 5 years later, So we always knew about this, some of the links between the seasons, and that Audrey Temple would rise at the end of the first and become relevant in the second. But a lot of the outlines, we kind of averted our eyes to some extent so that we could really focus on the job at hand, and then now focus fully on this new job at hand.
Thank you.
Can I ask another question?
Yes.
Do you think you have enough stories for a third season? Like, could you make other stories?
Yes.
Yeah, I mean,
Yes.
I think one thing that is cool is like we don't have a really intricate 7-season Bible that we are like stuck to, and some amazing, incredible I probably shouldn't say this, but like some crazy 5th season twist that we need to hold off on. and kind of kill time until. So, because like Eli was saying, we sort of take each season as its own story and then find ways to connect them as we go along and as we're discovering like kind of new characters that we're interested in. So that's what makes us pretty flexible. And then at the same time, as we're going, we're building this world bigger and bigger. You know, when we started doing the podcast, we just basically had 3 characters. And since then, as you'll see in season 2, we've, you know, built out the world of Geist and who's there, and also discovered this whole new world with Janelle Monáe's character. So I could just see us continuing out and sort of finding new places and new people to discover and then new interesting ways to tie them back.
Yeah, because and an exciting thing is each season we kind of get more little characters and references and settings in our quiver that then we can, you know, as we're starting to sketch out season 3, it's fun to imagine how things come back together. And it's always like, oh yeah, we could take him out of the jar and combine it. So it gets wider and wider. And as Micah said, you know, some shows get themselves into a bind because it's gonna end with like the final battle between the orcs and the whatever, you know, and then you're just having to, I don't know, it can be effective, but I also feel sympathy for those showrunners because you just got to kind of draw it out as long as possible and then make everyone mad when it finally happens. So.
Thank you.
Does anyone else have a question?
Can I ask?
I have a question. I'd like to ask, you talked about how you just kind of go with the season, but is there like some idea in your head about how this potentially could end? Do you have like some kind of, you know, maybe season number out there? I know some showrunners is like, okay, we're not going above 7 seasons or this, whatever. Do you guys have that kind of idea, or are you just kind of going with it?
I know this might be hard to believe, but like we don't have like it has never been like a thing where we're like, it really feels like 5 seasons to tell this story, you know, like and as we've gone along, we've discovered that there's all these different approaches to how to look at your TV show, how to look at your series. And for some people, I think an entire story kind of occurred to them. And then they went about the process of breaking it up into parts. And me and Eli sort of are more, this is not the right word, but we're kind of more improvisers a little bit. And I think we like to be stuck in corners in a way and kind of have to fight our way out. And so, yeah, I mean, I think about the show Deadwood a lot in kind of comparison. I don't know everything about how that was put together, but my understanding is it was a little bit more as they went than it was sketched out entirely, which might be totally wrong. But I sort of really admire that show in the way that it felt. So we sort of have, that's kind of our goal, is to have always things feel unexpected, to have things happen and people appear and worlds appear that you weren't like, okay, right, yeah, this is the next part of the story. This is what I would have expected. I think if it started to feel like that, we'd be disappointed.
Right. I mean, if we had tried to plan season 2 years ago, we never would have come up with a season 2, the sort of interesting sharp turn that we landed on. So I think it helps us stay surprised, and hopefully the viewers stay surprised too.
Can I ask you how you developed your taste in stories, films, television? How did you develop it, and what influenced you?
Wow.
Micah.
Yeah, I mean, that's a very broad question, really interesting. I mean, I grew up in America in the 90s, so I was watching like Quentin Tarantino movies and like independent cinema at the time, and that was really huge and influential for me. And then I kind of from there, and I was watching, you know, growing up, I was watching like Knight Rider and Airwolf and sort of like classic American TV. And then I don't know, I was just obsessed with it. I was obsessed with getting over into the other world that I saw on the screen, because that seemed like to me the real world. And yeah, that's about as far as I can take that right now at 8 o'clock in the morning.
Yeah, no, I mean, I think it's interesting. I would say maybe for both of us, certainly for me, there's like the movies and shows that we loved that excited us, but then it's pretty indirect how that I wouldn't necessarily draw any connection from that to this show we've made, because I find when you're making something, you're just like trying to find any way to make it work, and it's almost like something beyond my control. It's just like the way my mind works or Micah's mind works or what happens when those collide. It's not like we ever set out and try to make something in a certain genre or with a certain feel. I mean, maybe a little bit, but it's more just like you've got all these problems and you're trying to solve them one by one. And it's just, it's almost more unconscious, like the tone of, I have a weird voice. Why is this my voice? It's not because I like this voice. It's just what comes out of me when I try and talk. So, yeah, 8 a.m. I'm sorry.
Yeah, and then what's interesting is like when you're in a writer's room or when you're talking to people, you're sort of desperate for any kind of common ground to use to explain to somebody what you mean. So you'll, in the same conversation, be like, well, it's like that part of Annie Hall. And then by the end of the conversation, you'll be talking about Midnight Run or something like that. So it's helpful to have a vocabulary, but it's like Eli said, where you're just desperate sometimes for a way to give what you're feeling a shape. So often our references are just to sort of give someone an idea of what we see in our heads.
And it is true, like basically it's always Midnight Run for me. Every conversation, Midnight Run was like a 90 movie, Robert De Niro and Charles Grodin, and I sort of can only understand any other thing through the context of Midnight Run. It's such a problem, but someday I'll see another movie.
Thank you.
All right, guys, does anyone else have any questions?
Yeah, hi. Can I ask one more?
Right, and this will be the last question.
Okay, cool. So I want to ask you, you made the decision not to include Heidi's character in the second season. And you have Walter in the second season. How did you make that decision? And what was the difficulty you faced while writing the second season?
What was that last part of the question?
So without the Heidi's character, what were the difficulties you faced in writing the season?
Oh, sure. I can take a crack at that. I mean, so we always knew that Heidi would just be in season 1. And that was because we kind of wanted each season to have this central character arc. Because we really see, in a lot of ways, season 1 was Heidi's story. And season 2, Janelle Monáe's story. And of course, all the other characters too, but we want to have that single character backbone for each season. So that made that a very easy way to think about it. The challenges, I think, were the same as the exciting thing, was like, how do we make something that starts with a bang, feels totally new, has its own identity, both on character and plot and tone, but also rewards season 1. And beyond that, even, how do we make those connections between the 2 seasons unfurl in a way that's actually surprising rather than sort of a hindrance, like we have to do a lot of housekeeping to update it with season 1. So, have you guys seen how many episodes?
2.
Okay, well, so right after that, 3, you're going to start, even in 2, you start to see it join up, right? And then as it goes along, in more and more surprising ways, those 2 seasons connect. So that was something that was a challenge, but also was a lot of the creative spark for the season.
Okay, thank you.
All right, thank you, everyone. You can head now. You'll each have received an email to interview for your next roundtable. So if you guys just click in that link, you can head out, and that'll be that for this one.
Thanks, you guys.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Bye.